she already knew I was struggling with self-worth or things like that. So if she's kicking me when I'm down,
that's not going to help him, and it's not going to help us as a
If I had unlimited free time, I had stacks of cash in my safe, still had a beautiful wife with 2 kids. But guess what? I wanted to jump off the roof of my house every single day.
Welcome to the Couplepreneurs Show, where we reverse engineer the success of some of today's most influential power couples in business. Each episode is designed to equip you with the practical skills and knowledge that you need to grow businesses successfully without growing apart from your significant other in the process.
Yeah, today we're very happy to welcome and to introduce you to Tommy and Dianne McCollister. At High Level Husband, Tommy and Dianne's mission is clear: to create high-level marriages by fostering high-level individuals. Their personal journey from turmoil to triumph serves as a beacon of hope and a roadmap for those seeking to redefine their lives and marriages. Tommy and Dianne, so glad to have you guys here with us today.
Yeah, welcome to the show, guys.
Yes.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, and well done on an introduction. And I just love you guys' mission statement and how you guys open the show too. That just catches me right there. So I'm pumped.
Awesome.
Well, we know that a lot of couples who are listening are pumped as well, because you guys have some amazing content that actually drew us to you guys. And that's actually what I want to start off this episode with, is asking you about how you guys kind of came up with the content that you share. So what I love about Tommy and Dianne is the fact that they are very open in their content about sex.
Yeah.
And in a world, especially like amongst believers, sometimes sex could be a taboo topic that sometimes is looked at in a very negative way, when in actuality, it is a real amazing thing that we believe God designed for a husband and wife. And you guys hold nothing back when it comes to that. In fact, it is so cool what you guys are doing. So I would love to just open the show by asking you guys, how did you guys come to the point where you made that a very core part of your content? And have you had any backlash with that as well?
I think we can start at the last part there. Yes.
Yeah, tons, all the time, daily.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, obviously you could cure cancer and you're going to get hate online, right? Like that's just what it's part of the thing. Originally, when we just started creating content and doing it, it's kind of a crazy story of how we got here. I'm sure we'll probably get into it, but when we started creating content, we were just touching on all subjects. And as social media, as you guys know, like every time we would do anything that touched around sex, intimacy, anything, like it would be like 1,000 times greater, if not hundreds of thousand times better, like viral-ish content. We were like, okay, well, as marketing strategy, I think we need to go in. But it was cool because we started realizing then, of course, our DMs get flooded with people who are just struggling. And I think we always understood that people struggled in intimacy and sex, but I didn't realize to the level until we started doing that content. And then so we had to be real, but every time we do it, we get an insane amount of love, but an insane amount of hate. And usually the hate is from people who are really struggling in that department and know that they need to change it. And maybe they're the one causing it, but yet they don't want to be the bold and courageous person to do anything about changing who they are to do it. And so they want to take that pain and deflect it off them and put it on somebody else. And who better than do it than the people who made them feel uncomfortable? Us, right? At first it was terrible, right? Because we could get 1 billion comments that tell us we're the greatest ever, and then we get the
one that just crushes your soul.
Yeah. Now it doesn't bother me at like the smallest 0.5% at all, that it bothers me anymore, because I just understand, and that's it. Hurt people, and I'm not trying to hurt them, and they think I am. But it's just such a staple. And, so we've been together for 24 years, but married for 17. And what we've noticed is it's like, how is intimacy just getting better? Like I'm 43, Diane's 42. How is sex getting better after 24 years when we've had sex thousands of times, right? Like, shouldn't it just get worse? Right? Like that's what everybody says. When you get in your 40s, you just put on weight. When you get in your 40s, the sex goes away. Like life starts getting over the hill. You start plateauing. Well, that's a personal choice, right? To have that happen. Well, how is it only getting better for us? And so we started realizing what God was doing in our life to make it get better all the time, that we wanted to share that, like, this is how it keeps getting better. Because everybody always tells us the hate is like, well, it just goes away. Well, it's like, well, no, you can change that. No, you can't. Well, it's like, you really can.
It's a choice.
When you go in and do that work. And so I think it's of God, but it's just of social media. And I just know people are hurting in those areas of their life. And so we just like to keep it real because I'm not going to sugarcoat anything because who are we going to impact if I just don't get deep, you know?
Amen.
Well, that's inspiring for many reasons. Number one, you guys are bold enough to tell the truth. Number two, you guys are, as you age, you're saying that you are actually enjoying a better sex life than you did in the past, which is inspiring for so many people out there who may think that that is impossible. Number three, man, if anyone's listening to this, you're most likely an entrepreneur. You're most likely using social media to grow your business and to grow your brand. And this is a perfect example of why you shouldn't let the backlash prevent you from sharing the truth that has impacted so many lives. Because on the flip side of that, you guys have seen some amazing testimonies of people who saw your content and actually really, really resonated with that. Is that right?
100%. You know, I would say it's kind of changing to a certain extent now. There's other things that draw people in, but I think it was originally that's what really drew people in was the sex thing. And a lot of them would say the same things as you guys, that like, hey, we love that you're just honest and bold and talk about a topic where a lot of other Christians kind of sugarcoat it or don't go down that direction, or a lot of churches, and I'm not trying to dog churches, you know, but they kind of stem away from it because they don't want to ruffle
feathers at all.
Others, in there.
Yeah.
Whereas when we can just be real with somebody, then that kind of breaks down the walls right away, and they know, okay, well, they're not going to play around. They're going to come in and just shoot it to us straight. And so then we'll start with that. But, you know, the way coaching works, right? Like oftentimes they want us to fix their sex life. That's where they want to come from, right? But it's like sell them what they want and give them what they need, right? Like, and so it's not like we're going to come in day one. All right, well, tell us how many times you have sex and like what you're doing. It's like,
that'll come naturally when we start with the other stuff first.
If we ever even get to that topic, because it'll just naturally happen. Once you fix all the other stuff, then that stuff gets fixed. But if we just focus on this, you're ignoring the things that are causing this to go away, you know? So,
Yeah, I want to come back to that because I know you said like if you fix the other stuff, right? I want to get to what the other stuff is. But just very quickly, one of the questions that I would love to ask you guys, especially because like you said, you've been, together for, you said 24 years. And I think one of the things that's very interesting that we see with a lot of the entrepreneurial couples that we work with is intimacy is kind of like a tricky subject with entrepreneurs specifically, right? Because you spend a large amount of time together. You're kind of in this like work dynamic with each other. So it kind of changes the energy between the two of you on a day-to-day basis. And so I would love to hear just from your perspective, what are some of the challenges that maybe entrepreneurial couples, maybe that you guys have experienced, you've seen some of your clients experience, what are some of those challenges that entrepreneurial couples may experience around intimacy that differ from maybe just a non-entrepreneurial couple?
Wow, that's a great question. Typically, I see people have the order in their life out of order and out of structure, right? Where especially because you're an entrepreneur, so you're talking about work all the time, and you're talking about that. Well, that becomes to a certain extent an idol or a god, right? And it gets moved up. And so since we're doing it together, we can talk about that all the time instead of talking about other things in life or growing in other areas of life. We're just growing this one area because we're always talking about it. Let's just focus on this. Well, then maybe our faith life gets lacking, or our physical does, or whatever it may be gets lacking because we're just so laser focused on growing this business, which is amazing. But if your order and structure is out of whack, it doesn't matter, right? Like that you could have a $10 billion business, but if your marriage is terrible, who cares, right? Like that business is, you're not going to impact as many people's lives because it starts with the leadership, trickles down. And if you're struggling at home and you're yelling at each other and you hate each other, who cares what your bank account looks like, right? So when you can get your order in place, and we always say the order goes like this: God first, self second, marriage third, kids fourth, and then business fifth. Right. And even as an entrepreneurial couple. And just to break that down real quick, God, number one, that's self-explanatory, right? Like that's just biblical, right? Jesus says number one commandment is to love and honor and worship God, The second one is self, right? Well, the Bible also says the second commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. Key word, as you love yourself. If you don't love yourself, I can't love on my wife. I can't love on my employees. I can't love on my clients. And so I can't do any of that. So I have to make sure that I'm enough in myself. So I'm focusing on my physical, mental, and spiritual growth daily to be able to bring a full cup to my wife. And then we come to as a marriage, and then our cups overflow onto the kids. And then when we're solid there, it doesn't matter if our business is killing it or not, because we're so happy and satisfied. But because we're so happy and satisfied, we show up at our work, creative, energized, full of joy, and all that other stuff rather than showing up frustrated, sleepless, tired, stressed. And then we're just grindstoning to the work trying to just outwork our problems, which is never going to happen. So then we actually get more done in a less amount of time because we're just so full of joy. Well, then when you're doing that, you can see your partner's greatness because we're so full of joy. Now, when I see Dianne in herself and just killing her aspects of the business, I'm admiring her. I'm seeing her element, which honestly, like we said, we've been together for 24 years. I still think she's gorgeous, but that's my biggest attraction is her challenging herself, her doing something, her creating something. So then now I'm sexually attracted to her by like, wow, like, and then it helps, the beauty helps, but it's mainly that. Vice versa, you would say the same.
Definitely 1000%, which is how we then, by doing that, that's how our roles don't get confused as work and outside of work, of what our roles are, from spouses to work partners. Also, is kind of go back to your original thought and question.
Yeah. So
well, that's amazing. And I think this is something that anybody listening could immediately start to use to examine their life and ask ourselves, where are our priorities right now? What is the priority hierarchy that is determining the course of our actions and our decisions as a couple? You just heard it from them. They have God first. They have their self second. They then prioritize each other. They make sure that their cup is full before they go to impact other people. And as a result of doing that, like before they even get to the business, their life is fantastic.
Yeah.
How cool is that? Before you even open up a computer to check Slack or to check email or to check a text or to post something on social media, your life is already better than 99% of the world because you have your priorities straight. Yeah. Whereas we've seen, and I know you guys have seen as well, the complete opposite. The inverse of that is we all know very successful business people whose marriage is completely in shambles and whose spiritual life is completely in shambles. And there's no judgment, no condemnation. But what there is an observation of what is true and what is working. Because clearly there is something working with you guys if you can make it 24 years and still have the love that you have for each other.
Yeah.
So I love
that's
that.
great. Well said.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Now, I do want to touch on something, though. We noticed that you guys mentioned a lot of adversity was kind of in your past. So what I don't want to do is paint this Pollyanna picture that like, they're perfect, we're perfect. Everyone on this podcast is perfect, and you could be, perfect like us, and our sex life is great, and we look good, and our business is awesome, and life is great. Like sometimes I can feel so unrealistic.
I was going to say, come join our perfect club.
This is not by accident. So I would love to hear how you, like the adversity that you guys have been through, how you've overcome it, and like how it's even possible to be doing what you're doing today.
And I love that you used the word possible right there, because for 2023, the word of our year that we chose was possibility. And we wanted to find out personally what's possible in our own lives, but we wanted to be possibility for others in their lives. And that's all because of adversity and all of that. We've always had a really good marriage for the most part. At least we always thought it was at least a 9 out of 10. But once, like I said, we got to those 10 out of 10s, like we started realizing there were still levels after it, because I'm not one painting the perfect picture here, but we haven't argued in probably 10 years. And which is really amazing, but we've had a lot of struggles and strife, which I love. Like I'm writing a book right now, and I was writing the introduction last night, and I was like, I've done a lot of terrible things in my life to like Dianne and other people. I was like, wow, I'm a horrible person. And so I love that you guys bring it up, because not that it's my favorite part of the story, but to a certain extent, because God, it just shows the favor of God, of like what he can do when you give him something to work with, right? Because we're all specifically chosen. It talks about that in Ephesians, right? Where we're all specifically chosen. But it doesn't matter if we don't give him anything to work with, right? Faith without works is dead. So we have to take that action. But just to scale back, in like high school, I was literally the shyest kid in high school by far, which is crazy because here I'm yapping your guys' ear off, when you fast forward and do this, but literally the shyest kid in high school. My parents had the worst marriage in history, from physical abuse, verbal abuse, infidelity, you name it, it happened. And forever. And to a certain extent, still to this day, which God uses. One of my favorite Bible verses is Genesis 50:20, where it says, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So how can I come from the worst marriage ever Well, I learned what to not do,
Yeah.
and then now we're saving lives
Yeah.
because of it.
Good
Right? So
example of what you didn't want to be.
right. So what the devil intended for harm, which ruined me for a while, I will admit that ruined me, made me a shy person. It made me, become a substance, become turn to substances, have no self-worth, all of that
Following your dad's footsteps for a while.
for a while,
Yeah.
right? Because as we said,
Kind of leaning that direction.
Yeah.
right. It's like I said, I had infidelity, it was before we were married. Not that that justifies or makes it any better, but, before we were married, we've been together for about 5 years.
Yeah.
Because Diane was 17, I was 18 when we first started dating. And I just had so much self-worth. I went to like military prison. Like I just done like a bunch of bad things in my life and was a drug addict. And then was using women and drugs and things like that to try to make me feel like I can feel good about myself, right? Whereas Romans 12:2 talks about don't conform to the patterns of the world, right? Well, I was conforming to the patterns of the world and it didn't make me happy at all. It was ruining things. And so we had infidelity and we split up for 18 months.
Yeah.
But at that time, like Diane wasn't necessarily the woman she is today either.
Far from it. Far from it. Yeah, I mean, wasn't doing maybe as much as you were doing, but I was still doing so many bad things. I was being over promiscuous. I was just seeking the patterns of the world of what people around me were doing,
Yeah.
drinking too much, doing all the things that we.
And the promiscuity you're talking about is like when we broke up. So we broke
Yeah.
up for 18 months and we both just went wild. But then it was like, I'd always believed in God, but that's where it stopped, right? Like I didn't follow him, right? And Diane, I think, barely believed in God.
Mhm. Yeah.
Definitely never went to church or anything
Didn't
like
grow up with
that.
that at all.
And just it wasn't a part of her life. But that's what like was the only thing that got me sober. And like I watched a miracle happen in my life. Like I have a crazy testimony in that, but I won't bore you guys as people because it'd be too long. But like of like unexplainable things that happened that got me sober. And then Diane came back and our lives went to this, we came back together and we just, I pursued God like never before. I was still working a regular job at that time. Diane was working the same job she had for 19 years up until a couple 4 or 5 years ago.
Mhm.
And so we were just following, we were living in a small little city in Northern California, this little place called Eureka by the Oregon border. That was like next closest city is 5 hours away. It was just like super impoverished. And so we were just living this pretty good life after that. The normal things, 2 kids, a house, like jobs, barely getting by, not knowing that what was possible in life. And I was always had this calling, like, dude, you're meant for so much more than this. Like, and I just had this calling. Well, eventually I became left my job to become an entrepreneur, which was a blessing, but honestly, one of the hardest times in my life because this was 11 years ago. So social media wasn't as big then. Personal development wasn't as big then. It wasn't like you could just plug into a coaching program. I didn't even know about coaching programs back then, right? So we became entrepreneurs, or I did. And I quickly watched our bank account basically go to zero. And I have 2 young kids and a wife who's working a regular job and she's supporting me, but this ain't feeling so well. Barely, right? And so that was the very first time in my life that I heard God's voice. So we had been back together for maybe 10 years at that time, 9 years, somewhere around there. And so where we were from, it was the wheat capital of the world, this place called Humboldt County, right? Where at one point in time, it produced like 80% of the United States wheat. Wow. And so all of my acquaintances grew weed. I wasn't because I had a substance abuse issue and I just knew this calling in my life from God. Well, I'm watching all my friends kill it, balling out of control. And here I am trying to serve the Lord in an entrepreneur business for the Lord. And I'm dying, like literally dying. And I'm like, I don't get it, God. Little did I know is he was waiting to see the Abraham and Isaac moment. He's like, well, what are you willing to put on the altar for me? And I found out I wasn't willing to put anything on the altar because when it got scary, he literally, the first time I heard God's audible voice, but probably only heard it 2 or 3 times, but I was like, God, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to grow weed or do you not? Because I'm struggling, God. And he literally said, no. I literally heard his voice and I did it anyways. And it was the next 7 years of my life. I had unlimited free time. I had stacks of cash in my safe, still had a beautiful wife with 2 kids. But guess what? I wanted to jump off the roof of my house every single day because I wasn't living my purpose. I wasn't doing something that was better in this world. And I did exactly what God told me not to do. So it didn't matter that I had unlimited money and free time. Who doesn't want unlimited money and free time, right? I had it and it sucked. And so, make a long story short, 4 years ago, And our marriage was still good then during
Yeah.
this time. We weren't arguing.
No, it was,
She supported me. She
Mhm.
was definitely a very mediocre person in life.
Yeah, very stuck, you know. He had mentioned working the same job for 19 years. We just had nothing exciting going on, you know. I wasn't growing or changing or anything. I was just still that same person, just riding
No
along. Yeah, no
hobbies,
hobbies, nothing at all.
just being a good mom and a good wife, which is great. But gosh, but that's not what we're here just to be. It's just a mom and a wife. There's so much more, our talents and traits. And so
Mhm.
she literally was just stuck. Well,
Yeah.
that's because her leadership wasn't good, because I'm definitely stuck. And so 4 years ago, I raced BMX bikes, and I came out of retirement to come race in the very first lap of the national season. Ironically, in Vegas, we weren't planning on living here. I crash and I end up in the trauma ICU in Las Vegas. And on the ambulance ride there, I didn't feel God 1%, not 1%. And I literally thought I was dead. And the way the paramedics were talking was like, yo, this guy's about to die. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm young kids at home. My wife's in the front of this ambulance. I'm about to die. And I don't feel God 1%. What happened to your life, dude? Like God literally had to get me to the point of death to say, dude, you gonna move or what? Because now it's been 8 years or whatever, and you hate your life. And it was the best year. So 2020 turned to be the best year of our life. So we invested into coaching. COVID hits 2 months later, and we just basically looked at each other and like it was crazy. We just looked online. Where's a good place to move? Okay, looks like Henderson. Looks like a great place. We flew down here, found a realtor, bought a house. Well, it's a crazy long story. We had two mortgages, and at that point in time when we moved, because we were growing weed, I had to leave the weed industry. Well, because I wasn't very stewarding my money there very well. We moved here with zero income, two mortgages, two kids, and moved to the number one unemployment city in the country. And we're like, we got to make this work because we have zero income right now and two mortgages. What are we
Yeah.
going to do? And that's when we launched our coaching program. We got here, we sold our second car, and we were like, let's sell our car and we're going to buy into coaching. And so we did it. And literally, we had to burn the boats. And that's when God was like, now you put Isaac on the altar for me.
Mhm.
Let's see what we can do with your life. And
Yeah.
so fast forward 4 years later, like our lives have exploded. And I still, to this day, can't believe my wife's always been, in the past 4 years, my favorite transformation. Who she's become is so amazing. And I'm just so thankful. Who I've been able to become, I'm so thankful. And this life we live is surreal. But we had to go through literal hell to get here. But I'm
Mhm.
thankful for it.
Yeah.
There's so much goodness in
Yeah.
what you just said. And some of the things that I resonate with is you had to get to a point of near death
Yeah.
in order to finally accept God's calling on your life and to
Mhm.
take him at his word and to listen and to follow in the footsteps that he is leading you forward to take, which I think is so cool. The other aspect of it though, too, and this is kind of just reading between the lines, is that during this time, you still, both of you, were still committed to each other and to making it work. I mean, to go through everything you just talked about, the ups and the downs, both financially, emotionally, relationally, spiritually, those are a lot of ups and downs that you guys have overcome. But here you are representing what is possible for
Mhm.
so many couples worldwide. And like, you guys are just here, like, holding on to dear life. Like we can tell, for those that may be watching the video version of this, you can tell just by the facial expressions that like there's a calm confidence, a peace that is in your heart. And I believe that peace is because of what it is that you are doing. You're walking in God's calling for your life, and you are closer together as a couple than it seems like you've ever been. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, we only grow closer every day that goes by.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I
And
love
you know,
that.
when you do hard things together, right? Like,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
you don't blame each other for being in that spot. Like, it's really cool what happens, and you just grow through it, right? Because the Bible talks about becoming one. Like, we've literally became one. Like, she knows every single thought that comes out of my mouth. Like, because I journal out loud to just her, all the things I'm thinking. Well, then she gets to know me. So then we get to grow close to each other, and then we don't judge each other. That's why we don't argue. That's why I think because we know so much about each other, so we understand each other.
Right. We know the emotions or feelings that each of us are going through. So if one person seems like they're getting frustrated throughout the day, we know what they're going through. We know there's something going on and that they're not, mad at us. And then we're going to, take it out on them and, all the things that a lot of couples do go through.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Diane, I know that, even before we started recording, you said that you are, Tommy's more of the talker in your dynamic. Same. Kyle is more of the talker in our dynamic as well.
Represent Tommy.
But based on everything that you guys just shared, I would love to hear from you, Diane, just kind of your perspective while you guys were going through these different seasons, when you were watching Tommy go through these things spiritually, emotionally, those kinds of ups and downs. What was kind of going through your head during that time? And like, how did you guys stand so solid through that?
That's tough. I feel like I've always been such a person, my emotions don't go too high or too low. So I'm always just kind of that follower that, or I was at the time, kind of just that follower that just kind of went with, the flow of things. My emotions were always, going high or low. So I feel like I just kind of flowed with whatever he had going on. And I was just always accepted with whatever he was going on and serving him during those times of just being by his side because we always did have a good relationship. And so I feel like we just kind of were just on that certain level where we just had a certain understanding and love between us that just didn't change no matter what was going on in our lives.
Yeah, well said on that. I think that she didn't like because I was struggling. She wasn't like, I knew you were going to fail at this. Like, you're
right.
terrible, and then take it out on me, right? Like, you need to do better and like put me down when because she already knew I was struggling with self-worth or things like that. So if she's kicking me when I'm down,
that's not going to help him, and it's not going to help us as a couple.
Yeah.
So she quietly supported me through that process of it, and which is what I needed, which then only made me want to love her and succeed even more, right? Because here she was, never left my side during it and just quietly supported. So that's so key. That's where so many couples go wrong is they want to get defensive or they want to put the other person down or whatever. And it's like, why don't you guys just be on the same team? Like, and just support each other. If you strike, like if a player strikes out we're on the same baseball team, if I tell him he sucks, like that's not a good teammate, but I'm like, hey, no worries, bro. Get back up there next time. You can get it. You get it. You're a great player. Don't forget who you are. That's what we should be in a marriage. We're all going to strike out at times. We got to be able to support each other and be an encourager during all times with each other because then we'll just always keep growing in the same direction.
I love that. One of the things that even whenever we're kind of like experiencing, like we're similar to you guys. We don't fight. We call them heated debates, if anything, because we like to like have these like debating, like intellectual conversations. But one of the things that like anytime, we do notice that we're just either one of us is getting a little bit testy, like if, we're under stress or whatever that is, 9 times out of 10, we'll just kind of be like, hey, same team. Like we're on the same team. Like just that little reminder. So I love that you guys use that language.
And I love the example, Diane, that you set for many women who may be listening to this right now, who are watching their husbands go through some serious trouble. I mean, entrepreneurship in general comes with itself a significant amount of pressure that gets completely overlooked in our very glamorized digital marketing culture where entrepreneurship is like this push button and riches and like it's super nice, it's super easy, it's super fun. Just like set up a YouTube account and money just flies through the computer. It's weird. I'm obviously being facetious and sarcastic. The reality is that entrepreneurship is hard. And we don't want to make any sort of underestimated, statement that it isn't hard. And the fact that you had the pressure that you were going through, Tommy, and that Diane was so supportive of you during that season, that is such an amazing example of what any of us could do for our spouses when we were watching them go through a hard season. I personally love that. I resonate with it. In 2020, 2021, I was going through a pretty significant like mental crisis myself. It was like I guess I would call it like a midlife crisis, even though I was not even 30 at the time, but still it felt like a midlife crisis. I didn't know who I was. I was losing. Long story short, I met a lot of role models that I grew up looking up to. And then once you meet people, you realize your projection of who you thought they were isn't actually who they are, but I attached my identity to them. It's a wild conversation, but either way, I went through a very crazy wilderness season where I was questioning who I was, what I wanted, etc. It was so painful. But every time I would talk to my wife about it, she was like, I support you. I'm here for you. There's no judgment. She was always by my side. She was my biggest fan. And like, to me, just like you, Tommy, that was so inspiring to motivate me and activate me to be all that God called me to be. So for anybody watching, what they said is spot on, and it's a great model. And I appreciate you guys representing what's possible.
Yeah.
Mhm.
What they
Yeah,
said.
I
So
love that you guys are the same way.
Yeah.
The same
Yeah.
thing. I can
Yeah.
tell. I can tell. Like you were saying, there's a piece of knees about us,
Mhm.
which I thank you for saying that because yeah, it is. Like Philippians 11 through 13 is like my verse of my life the past few years, where Paul talks about being content, whether having plenty or none, well fed or hungry. You know, he's just
Mhm.
content, right? I don't mean content of complacent, right?
Right.
But just like content and like, hey, he's going to be just be himself and persevere no matter what. And he wrote that by why he was sitting in a prison cell, not why he was on a beach sipping a margarita, right? And
Exactly.
so that's my verse in my life. So we are at this piece, but I can see that about you guys as well. But that's
Yeah.
just what it is. It's like a relationship is when you can just love each other. Doesn't mean you can't have fun discussions and things, but just recognize that you can't go past a certain one because it's never going to be good. Love always wins. It's undefeated. But you know, when we go over it, it's never good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the things that a core theme of what you guys talk about, your business is high level husband, right? And the theme even in your bio is all about, growing as an individual allows you to grow as a couple, right? And really being the person that your spouse wants to be with. One of the things that I think we sometimes hear, and maybe you've heard this as well, is, well, I'm doing my part, but my partner isn't. Like I'm growing, but my partner isn't. And so what would you say to somebody who is maybe in that situation right now?
Mm.
Or
That
who
was our
feels like they're-
situation.
Yeah.
That was our situation where
Okay.
at one point he started leading the way for himself. He started growing as an individual. He started doing all these things for his personal growth. He had found his relationship with God. He just did so many things. And I was stuck behind and he's like, why isn't she growing? Why is she not following my lead? And it took years for me to kind of catch on and latch on to that. But I will encourage anybody. It just takes time. It's not going to be an overnight thing of somebody else growing and the other person not following. Eventually, they're going to see the fruits that they're getting and they're going to follow along.
Yeah,
It just
so
takes
good.
time.
We can't have the biggest one is expectations,
Yeah.
right? Because in any area of life, expectations, if we have expectations for our business, we're setting ourselves up for failure because it's either going to go as planned and then we get there and we don't it's never going to feel as good as we thought it would feel, kind of like what you were saying, Kyle. Like you met all these cool people, like can't wait to meet them, and then you realize that wasn't as
That was a
good.
letdown.
So we do that in business with like when I finally get to the 7-figure mark, I get to the 8-figure mark, I'll be so happy. Well, you get there and it's not all that great, right? So you have expectations. One of my closest friends who won the Super Bowl. It was the worst day of his life. He said it was the worst day of his life because he worked his whole life to get there and it didn't really all feel that great. And so it's not because we shouldn't have these goals, but that we got to have a bigger mission above it, right?
Mhm.
And so just to get back onto the question, early on, like especially real early on, when like my life had been saved from like this crazy miracle that happened with me being a drug addict, and not in an egotistical way, but Diane was the beneficiary of like this miracle. Like she
Right.
got this guy that like cleaned up all the nastiness that made him a bad person.
Yeah.
And now I got to come back in her life as a reinvented person. And so I was like full force into God and like all that. And I was like, babe, like we gotta be at church, yeah, like reading the Bible and like all this stuff. She was like, no, dude.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I didn't grow up in a household that, went to church or talked to God or anything. I had no relationship, so it was completely foreign to me. So even though I got to watch this amazing transformation with him, I was like, yeah.
I don't feel like I need to. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
that's cool that God's the thing. I believe it, but like,
Right.
let's just worry about what's for dinner tonight,
Sure.
And my pastor at the time, still to this day, is probably my best piece of advice I've ever got in my life, and this applies to this situation. He said, "In her own time, you keep being the person that you need to become,
Mhm.
and just keep focusing on the right things,
Yeah.
and then that will happen in her own time." Sure enough, about 3 years later. So I'm not saying 3 weeks later, 3 months later, 3 years later, I just kept going to church by myself. I got so to the point where people would introduce me to women at church because they thought I was single because I was there all the time by myself. And I had to remind them, like, no, I'm actually married. Like, my wife just doesn't go to church. But then slowly, just like one little thing, and then she started growing in faith, right? But then it was about when we made this big move together and we did this business that like it really just took time as I led the way and just didn't put pressure on her because there was times in this business where I wanted to make, because as you're seeing, I'm the more talkative one.
Right.
I wanted to make another Tommy. All right, babe, well, you got to do this. You got to create the content. You got to do this. Like, you got to do this. Where I put pressure on her and had expectations that she needed to be me. And then that wasn't
That's
the
asking
case.
for failure.
Because that's not who God created her to be. So again, I had to take my advice in her own time, allow her to be who she was. Whereas like discipline is probably like my favorite love language. Like and you get probably the same thing. It's like whatever you got to make things non-negotiable and consistent every single day, and it compounds effects. Well, Diane became the most disciplined I've ever met in my life out of Super Bowl champions at anybody. She's the most disciplined person now. That was not the case, but it started with me doing it. And then once she caught the fire, it went. But if I had put pressure on her the whole time,
Or
babe,
got frustrated with
yeah,
me.
why aren't you in the Word today? Why aren't you at the gym? Babe, literally you could have a snack. You went to the gym today. You know you're going to ruin what you just did at the gym. Babe, I'm going to this conference this weekend. You need to find yourself one. Like, that's only gonna build frustration and tension.
Yeah.
I just led the way. Well, I would share things that I'm learning, and then she would see the fruit in my life.
Mhm.
My actions are changing, my words are changing. I'm not getting frustrated in life as much anymore. I want some of that. But it took time and just no expectations. And then she wanted a piece of what was happening, and then she just ran with it. So that would probably be the biggest piece of that.
I love that so much. So anybody listening, I mean, you could apply this in any aspect of your life where you feel like you are going 100 miles an hour in one direction, and maybe your spouse isn't as on board with whatever that direction is, be it your business, be it your health journey, be it personal development, be it your spiritual life, like Tommy and Dianne are talking about. Whichever area of life that you may feel that disconnect in, apply this knowledge, because I can tell you from our own experience, that's absolutely true. Like if you could just focus on being who you need to be, you will lead by example. And the important thing that Tommy also said is not putting any expectation or pressure on your spouse to conform to whatever you want them to be as well. Like there's a balance there of you owning who you are and doing what you can control while simultaneously supporting and not pressuring your spouse in the process. I think that's amazing. And again, you guys are living testimonies to the results that can happen when you do that. So, all right, I got one more question to ask you guys. But before we do, if people are loving this and they want to get into your world and see the content and continue to be inspired by the two of you, where can they go to follow you and connect with you guys?
I'd say like Instagram is probably our best content. We have a website. It's just highlevelhusband.com. But honestly, like for me, like websites, whatever, I just love Instagram because you can do stories and you get to see behind the scenes, you get to see the content, and then it has a link tree in there, right? And so go to Instagram. It's just Tommy McCollister. I have my own Instagram. Dianne has her own Dianne McCollister. But I'd say my page is more of the main business page of the two, even though Dianne puts a lot of great stuff out. But that's probably the best place. We have a podcast. It's just High Level Husband Podcast. Best place is Spotify or YouTube for that. And we have a YouTube channel, Tommy and Dianne McCollister. It's probably the best spots, but Instagram. And then, then people can connect further from there if they ever need that or just grow.
Absolutely. Awesome. Yeah. And everybody watching, I know you're going to love their content. That's how we actually got connected with them, is we saw their content shared by a lot of people. We're like, this couple is awesome. So you definitely want to check out the content that they're doing. All right. So last question, and I want to hear from both of you. And I would like to challenge you guys to keep this to like one sentence if you can. But like,
so we want that like real raw, like what's the first gut?
The first gut reaction, no holds barred. Are you guys open to that challenge?
Yes.
Of course.
Okay.
You're building the hype for this.
Yeah, I know. Now I'm like nervous. I don't get nervous often, but now
it's probably overhyped at this point. So, all right, Tommy, we'll start with you. If you had an audience, if you walked on stage to an audience of only entrepreneur couples, and you could just give them one piece of advice that you believe could change their lives, what advice would you give them?
I think it might be the same answer for both of us.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be too Christian oriented, but you have to keep the main thing, which is loving and honoring and worshiping God with your mind, heart, and soul first and foremost. Because if you don't have that, nothing else will ever matter in life at the end of the day.
Love that.
Love it.
Dianne, would you say?
Well, then I'll say the next thing probably that would be like the second on the list then, because that's what I would have said too. Would be to be disciplined in your life in all areas. Because if you're not disciplined, how are you going to continue with the things that you need to do every day? And so, God first, but
that same thing, you need to be disciplined with your faith, or it doesn't matter, right? Like you got to show up, right?
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah, work, hustle, pray, all in one, essentially. So
Amen.
I love it. Hey, Tommy and Dianne, thank you so much for being a part of the show. If anyone's listening, you want to connect with them, make sure you follow Tommy McCollister on Instagram, connect with them on their podcast, their YouTube show. Make sure that you are exposed to their content regularly. It will uplift you. It will inspire you. And for all of you couplepreneurs out there, we just want to thank you for tuning in, and we can't wait to see you on the next episode of the Couplepreneurs Show.